update on the progress of I guess it would be my eviction. Now let's start with what is the cause of this eviction, of me being out of work even though I have a job, the cause of my suffering, why I'm losing everything, why I might lose all my belongings, why my health is so severely bad or that's not the word I want. I'm getting a blockage. I can't say any of them. Okay, we're just gonna go on from there. Oh wow, I'm not doing good today at all. Oh, well, I didn't take my Triliptol at 6 a.m. Yeah, that would be it. I didn't take my epilepsy medication. That's this right here. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of that, they're probably gonna cut me off the epilepsy medication soon because my father is calling them saying it's not necessary. Yes, my father and my relatives say it's all some fantasy, it's all made up. Take him off the medication, he doesn't need it. And the doctors will see me worsen once again because they see me get better a little bit with epilepsy medication, and then as I become homeless or I'm more outdoors or I'm looking at flashing lights more or as the medication gets pulled away, I get worse and I end up homeless in the woods or something like that, not because of anything other than I can't move. I can't talk, I can't move, and I get stuck, I get injured. The ambulance picks me up, they release me. An ambulance picks me up, they release me. Nobody can live up in a tree in the middle of winter in New Hampshire at 0 degrees all winter long. And if you're thinking, well, why don't you just get a job? I have a job. What good is that if I can't work? You need it if you have a medical condition. Let's say you're walking down the street and somebody shoots you and robs you. Well, let's say somebody goes, "Give me your purse." And then you say no. And they throw you on the ground, they rape you, and then they shoot you in the leg, and then they run off. And then an ambulance picks you up, brings you to the hospital. They say they got to amputate your leg. They take off your leg. Then they put you in a wheelchair. And you're in the hospital for the next 90 days. They give you mental therapy. They have you do all that. You overcome the mental part of the rape and getting shot. When you hear a loud noise, you don't jump anymore. Are you all better to go back to work? Are you? You still have a job, right? You still have a job. You're just missing a leg. Are you okay to go back to work now that you're over the PTSD? No. You still are in a wheelchair and you don't have a wheelchair to leave the hospital. The hospital will not let you take the wheelchair with you. So as soon as you get thrown out of there, they're just throwing you on the sidewalk unless there's a car. Now, see, for me, if that happens to me, they just throw me onto the sidewalk and I crawl my way to the shelter. That's what they do for me. They just throw you out onto the sidewalk to crawl. At least that's what they've done to me and many other homeless individuals that get hurt. But if you have good insurance, a lot of money, or a family with money, or somebody with a car just to pick you up, they usually throw you into somebody's car and then that person drops you off at the shelter and then you have to try to get a wheelchair or the shelter drops you off onto the sidewalk because you have a missing leg. Now, if you have any family members or loved ones, you'll be getting into their car and they'll be driving you home so you don't have to go through any of that. But no matter what, you still have to get a prosthetic leg or a wheelchair to get around. Once when you have a wheelchair, then you can get around and maybe some jobs open up to you, but most likely you're still not able to work even though you still have a job. Because if you're working at a gas station, maybe you could do it from a wheelchair. But if you're working as a gym instructor, your job you still have, you're not going to be back to anytime soon. And then they tell you, well, we have a different job, but we just need you to be able to stand up once in a while. Well, still you're in the wheelchair missing a leg. So at that point, you need a prosthetic. So then you go to the doctors, you get documentation of your disability. I'm missing a leg, I fall, I need a wheelchair, whatever that documentation is. Then you try to get a prosthetic. Then you get the prosthetic and you get used to the prosthetic. Then once when you're used to the prosthetic, then you can go back to the job as a gym instructor, and maybe they have you do something easier, like show people how to do stretches. You do a class of stretches or something, and you use your prosthetic and you overcome your disability because now you have a prosthetic, so you're able to go back to work. But see, that requires documentation from a doctor. That requires some medical equipment or medication to get you moving again. Maybe you're on some medication to help with the rejection of the having your leg removed, or maybe you're on antibiotics. You're going to need those antibiotics if you're going back to work. This is what I need. I'm over the mental part of my mother poisoning me and destroying my health. But I'm going to continue to have problems moving my legs. I'm going to continue to have problems talking. I'm going to continue to having problems with my arms. I'm going to continue to fall down here and there. I'm going to need a wheelchair at times or a cane at times. And I'm going to continue to get injured on the side of the road. I also have to be careful not to be around cold, flashing lights, loud, weird noises, and I have to be careful of touch due to the fact that that causes seizures and head injuries that I cannot afford to have any more of. So, how do I get these things? You go to a doctor and they write you documentation. Then from there, you get medication for epilepsy. And then from there, you go back to work or you go on Social Security and you work part time. And then you drop the Social Security as you go full time, or you drop the work as you get worse. Why am I not able to do this? Because my father continues to tell my doctor that there's nothing wrong with me as I bleed on the side of the road as they scrape me off the ground. Literally, the EMTs are scraping me off the ground every year. And then when they ask my father for my past Social Security case, my father tells them, there's nothing to see here. Don't help him. Nothing to see here. It's all a fantasy. He's a liar. It's a fantasy. He's mentally ill. Don't help him. So then the doctors don't know how to make heads or tails of this. They got 15 years of made up fantasies from my mother. They got a father with a dead wife that wants to say his son is a shithead, making up illnesses. And then the doctor has to pick, okay, we got the father saying that the son's making up the illnesses. We got the son being scraped off the side of the road, bleeding all the time with a past drug habit. He was brought to the emergency room on like a weekly basis while living in the woods of Massachusetts. They found him with drugs in his system a lot of the time. Well, alcohol. I consider alcohol a drug. But anyways, alcohol in his system they found constantly. What is a drug? They also found opiates in his system like once or twice, or I admitted the opiates or whatever. And they have no proper documentation of this kid. They just keep on finding him unconscious. They ask the kid what happened. The kid says he fell, or he went unconscious, or he was cold and he shook and went unconscious. They can't find any drugs in the kid's system. And they know he likes to smoke or sell this K2 or something. They know he likes to drink alcohol, and they got opiates. But they also have records from age 7 that say the same thing. But there also would be records of this if my mother and father just wanted them to report it. But see, when I had the fall in Ogunquit, Maine, my mother and father just let me sleep it off. When I had the overdose in Westford, my mother just let me sleep it off. When I was bumping in the furniture for every single year of my life, my mother and father just called it self-harming, or in the beginning it was called a coordination issue. But by later, my mother called it self-harming. So at age 7, my bumping in the furniture was called a coordination issue. But by age 16, me bumping in the furniture and falling down was called a self-harming. My mother just switched the words and tried to cover up what was going on. At age 7, the self-harming bullshit narrative, nobody was buying. Nobody was buying my mother's bullshit at age 7. They all knew something was up. So my mother called it a coordination issue because that's what the doctors called it. The doctors told her, no, it's not self-harming. Maybe the sucking on the skin is self-harming. But we don't believe that one. We don't believe that your son having coordination issues at school is self-harming. So they wouldn't buy my mother's bullshit, and they put me in physical therapy, speech therapy, and things got a little better. My mother didn't listen to anybody and just did ballet straight off the rip and then moved me to another state. But this continued. In Texas, I still had bumping in the furniture, falling down. In New Mexico, I bumped in the furniture, I fell down all the time. In Maine, I fell to the ground, screaming in pain, shaking on the ground just from fireworks. Again, my mother calls it some made up mental illness like she's some doctor instead of bringing me to the doctors like she's supposed to. She just brings me to psychiatry because she knows better than everybody. You're not going to get help with a neurological disorder in your son's nervous system through a psychiatrist. And especially if your mother is just going to fantasize about their son being mentally ill and think everybody's out to get her. I mean, this happened in Westford. My mother threw away all my toys because she was jealous of them. My mother also thought I was out to get her when I just showed her my swimming medal from the orphanage and then made up fantasies and stories about that swimming medal. This continued, so it's no wonder that at age 31, when I walk into a neurologist office and I try to get documentation of my disability, we get nowhere because my child records are junk. Plus, my mother had me brainwashed in believing her rhetoric, so they have me repeating what my mother and father tell me. My mother and father tell me I'm psycho. Zach, it's also fantasy. So then I go to the doctor and say, hey, I'm falling down. I'm bleeding on the side of the road. You just scraped me off the cement, and I was unconscious for 2 days. I guess it's just one big fantasy, my mother says. And then I sound even more psycho because I'm repeating what my mother and father say. So that's why I've learned to stop doing that. Stop repeating my mother's and father's nonsense. If I'm walking down the street to go to work and it's an average day, and I start shaking from a neurological disorder, I fall down, have a seizure, I wake up all bloody on the side of the road. They scrape me off the fucking cement and put me in an ambulance, and I wake up in the hospital, and they tell me I've had seizure problems or a seizure or neurological symptoms or a fall, or they ask me and I tell them I fall and there's no drugs in my system and they have no idea what's going on. And then they release me and I go home. That is not a mental illness in any sense of the word. That is a physical problem that needs to be handled. You can't have people walking down the street getting bloodied up from seizures with no reason for it other than my father says it's a fantasy, so that's all it is. It's nothing. It's nothing to worry about. It's all a lie. Get away from me. Yeah. Let me work. But you just fell down and had a seizure in front of the customers. We can't let you work. Yeah, my father says it's okay. Nobody's going to let me back to work just because my father is using bullshit to go on. Just because my father wants to go on a vacation and get drunk and not handle his past problems with his second wife. Just because his second wife poisoned a kid and brainwashed him and used fucked up rhetoric. And that my father's still to this day trying to convince me not to get better. Just because my father wants me to keep his secret and not get better does not mean that I should repeat his rhetoric. It means I should do everything possible to learn, understand, and get better so I can get to work. So that requires me going to doctors, but that also requires the doctors not listening to my father and mother's rhetoric. What is very hard because I can't control what my doctors think or do. All I can do is give them the real information, and that's it. But if they're getting fake information from one person and real information from me, that doctor could go haywire on his diagnosis. The doctor needs to only take the information from his patient, not somebody getting away from with a crime. Like, let's say somebody accidentally poisoned somebody else. Let's say I sold you a Percocet, but it was poisoned and I made it myself. Then you went to the doctors, and I'm the one who decides what's real or not. I don't think you're going to get your diagnosis because I'm the one who sold you the illegal drugs, and I'm the one telling your doctor what's wrong with you. I'm not sure that you are actually going to get what you want because I want to get out of trouble. That would be the wrong thing to do. I would never act like that. But this is the way people think. They think, oh, I'll get in trouble if they find out the truth. And then they try to do everything possible to avoid that from happening. This happens a lot. Now, my father definitely does not want it to be the case that his second wife poisoned and hurt an orphan child, and that orphan is still hurting today. My father doesn't want that to be true. I don't want it to be true. But I'm only going to give the doctors the facts. I was given pills. I experienced an overdose at age 7. That's when this neurological problem started. Teachers were bringing me in the hallways asking about this. I had a seizure in New Mexico. I didn't find out these were called seizures until the age of 19 at this place. I also had another seizure in Lynn, but at that time I still wasn't sure what it was called or what they were doing. I just learned about this the first time by a doctor telling me about it after a brain scan. Before that, all I knew was I shake a lot beforehand. It feels real bad, like lightning in my back. Then I go unconscious and fall down, and then I wake up a while later, and it's hard for me to move. That's all I knew it as. But now I know it's called a seizure when I go unconscious on the ground and wake up on the ground. I also know that the shakes, the lack of movement in my body, the problems when I move my thumb and my leg shakes, or the fact that I twitch out of control or I lose my speech, that's called a neurological disorder. I know that now. But at the age of 20, I did not know that. My mother told me that bumping in the furniture all the time was called self-harming. My mother told me that the overdose that caused my neurological disorder was called an allergy attack. My mother told me I was bipolar, and that's all I needed to tell the doctor. My mother tried to get me to repeat made up illnesses, and she did get me to repeat some of my mother's rhetoric. My mother would tell the doctor rhetoric and then have me repeat the rhetoric. My mother would also try to brainwash this rhetoric into me. So I was so confused that all I knew to tell the doctors about were, oh, I'm all this. And I just repeat what my mother told me. And then I tell the doctor honestly about the side effects and symptoms I'm having. They get lost. They're like, the symptoms you're describing and the illness you're describing, like you're having problems sleeping, you're hyper, you bump in the furniture, you have problems with your medication, you seem to fall down, you have this lightning in your back, you shake a lot, your legs bounce around, and you have this uncomfortable feeling going through your arms, legs, and back and neck. None of that makes any sense to a psychiatrist. After your mother just said he's bipolar, he goes up and down and up and down. When meanwhile, I go down when my mother gives me downers, and I go up as the downers wear off. Because I'm ADHD, I'm always hyper. Now, I should mention that I am definitely getting thrown out of my house in my apartment because of my father and mother doing these things. I have a job, but I can't go back until the doctor gives me documentation of this neurological disorder. Once when the doctors give me the paperwork I need on my illness, then I could go back to work. But the doctors are having a lot of difficulty doing that because of my father calling this a fantasy, it's a lie, it's whatever. So I'm never going to get back to work in time to keep my apartment. So the reason why I'm going to lose over $20,000 worth of work, that's bed frames, mattresses, decorations, medical equipment, food, pans, cookware, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to a $300 vacuum, things like that. The reason why a cat is going to have to go into a shelter and all these things is only because my father has lied to the Department of Health and Human Services and the doctors. If the doctors were continuing to listen to me like they did in the beginning, we would already have a diagnosis. It's been over 6 years. I've been up here talking about this for 6 years. The problem is that the doctors do not want to work on this with a father who says it's all made up and with no previous documentation. If my mother and father had brought me to the emergency room during the overdose, if they had me looked at in a Maine when I fell to the ground, if they stopped over medicating me and giving me all those drugs, if they listened to me and brought me to the doctors based upon what the kid is experiencing, instead of the mother's fantasies, because you have 2 ways to diagnose a child or get a child help. Let's say there's a mother and a father and a child. Now, you could pay attention to what the child is asking for help with, like asking for help with his eyesight, or asking, or he's bumping in the furniture and he wants to stop bumping in the furniture, or he's really hyper and he doesn't want to be hyper talkative all the time. He's tired of being told to shut up. Then you could base upon those information. Oh, you're very hyper all the time and you can't concentrate? Well, here's some Ritalin. You're bumping in the furniture and you can't control your body. Well, let's bring you to a neurologist and see if there's something wrong with your nervous system, or the parts that connect your arm to your brain or your legs to your brain. Let's see what's going on there. Oh, your son is talking about an overdose at age 7 and saying everything changed for him that day. Well, maybe we should look more into that, seeing as your son is really into that and says there's something wrong there. Okay, so let's ask questions about that. That is how you truly help your son with his health. But if you're just going to go by the mother's information, then the mother has to be documenting the son's health. But if the mother is just going to go off the rails and call swimming medals stolen and say that he is a fire setter and say that he's a pyro and say that he's out to get me and all these other things, then that's useless. You can't go by the mother's information if she's going to think that everybody's out to get her. If the mother is mentally ill, seeing things that aren't there, giving pills that aren't prescribed to her son, giving extra doses of over-the-counter medication to her son as punishments, if the mother is jealous of her son's toys, if the mother is drinking alcohol at any given time, then that mother, you cannot base your health care that you want to give to the son off of that mother. Instead, you have to pay attention to the son, what he needs for health care, if you want to help the son. If you want to help the mother with her mental illness, that's a whole separate case. But getting your son put into a place in New Mexico, a cabin that isn't built yet, because your wife has this great idea to cure him of attachment disorder, that's not good. That's not going to help him. Over medicating your son on 6 different pills because your mother has just gone on the fantasy land with the doctors, that's not going to help your son. Telling the doctors that your son bumping in the furniture is self-harming is not going to help the doctors. Help your son. Blaming your own drinking on your son isn't going to help your son. Calling your son a shithead on a regular basis and most of that shithead stuff being made up isn't going to help your son. When your son jumps into a pool and needs stitches, saying that he did it on purpose by self-harming, that's not going to help your son. All that's going to do is get your son hurt, drugged, and make it so if your son has any real injuries, he can't get a diagnosis for it. Because if you make up a bunch of fake injuries, then your son's real injury won't be able to be treated. It's like the boy who cried wolf. My mother cried wolf. My son has this illness. 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 My mother wants this pill. I need this pill for my son. I need this pill. My son has this mental illness, and my son has this mental illness. And when you have a mother cry mental illness over and over, and your son has a real physical illness like a neurological disorder, it's hard for your son to get treatment because your mother already cried wolf. My mother cried wolf over and over and over and over to make sure that the real wolf would never be found, what was her. Yes, my mother accidentally or purposely slipped a bunch of medications together during the watching of Batman Mr. Freeze. I experienced an overdose, and my nervous system is still fried today from it. Hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of people have asked me questions on this. I've been told I need to be on disability, and I've been told I'm disabled ever since this overdose happened. They'll say, Zach, you don't look right. Zach, you need to be on disability. Zach, your movements and your health, you look terrible. You're worse than me. You need to be on Social Security. Zach, you're on a lot of pills. That's a lot of pills for somebody not to be on Social Security. Stuff like that. All my entire life. And I'll have flashbacks of my mother giving me medications I'm not prescribed for the rest of my life. I have a flashback of my mother giving me a full bottle of Ipecac as a punishment just because I was learning words and I ate a mushroom that was outside on the ground. That's simple. I was learning new words and didn't understand the words that another adult told me, and there was a mushroom on the ground. So I deserve to have my stomach and esophagus damaged for the rest of my life. So I learned my lesson, was my mother's opinion. Was poison him with extra medications to teach him a lesson. And my mother admitted this in front of multiple other adults, my sister, my brother in law, my brother, my father, and nobody batted an eye or ever called the authorities at any time. Now I'm age 31, and I still am going to a neurologist, still trying to get help, still trying to collect Social Security. And who has benefited off my illness so far? My father has got money off my illness. My mother got attention off my illness. My mother got to stay out of trouble because of my illness and her lies. My father also got me to wipe out his mistake with Social Security at age 19. My mother passed away at the age of 19 of liver failure because she couldn't stop popping pills and drinking. Just popping more and more. She even popped my own pills. I told her, please stop popping my pills. And she didn't stop. My father found out my mother was popping my pills. And my mother said it was only one time. So my father said, see, it's only one time. You're in trouble for seeing her pop your pills. So there's always stuff like that. When my mother does something wrong, I'm the one who gets punished. When I do something good, my mother makes up a story and I'm punished. If I do something good, I'm punished. If my mother makes up a story, I'm punished. If my mother's about to get caught for something, she lies and then I'm punished. And if I do start learning how to get better, or if I start telling the truth about what's going on, then I'm drugged and punished. This is awful. And I've never got help with my disability. I've had to live 25 years with a disability still today, and I've never once received help, and I still need documentation. But the only documentation we have is my mother's fantasies. Oh, he played with a book of matches one time, tried to figure out how to light it at 6 years old, so he's a pyromaniac trying to burn my house down. Oh, he jumped into a pool, so he's a self-harmer. Oh, he's bumping in the furniture for 15 years. He's a self-harmer. Oh, he won a swimming medal. He's a liar, a thief. He makes up fantasies, and it must be a black kid's medal. Oh, and we need to drug him. Oh, he likes to play with his toys. He must like the toys better than me, and I need to throw them all away because he likes the toys better than me. I mean, it's just one thing after another with my mother. I just, oh yeah, and me winning a swimming medal because my old last name is on the back of it, it must mean I'm out to get her, my mother thinks. It's totally nuts. My mother was so completely mentally ill. She thought that everybody was out to get her. She thought that Tim was out to get her. I was out to get her. She even thought that Valerie was out to get her. Constantly, she would have private talks with my father about everybody being out to get her. We would leave the party, though everybody would leave, and there would be me, my father, and my mother. My mother would talk about how me and my brother need drugs, how I'm no good, how everybody's out to get her, how Valerie and Ernie are stuck up and they're just trying to get back at her somehow. She would talk about this stuff constantly. She even would make up stories about other people. Like her best friend Alice, we went out to eat one time at this seafood restaurant I used to call the Porthole. It had a big porthole. We went in and we were on a table close to the door to the right. I was underage, I was like 16, but everybody else is over 21. My mother, my father, there's a 21-year-old, what is my aunt's, or I just call her Aunt Alice, daughter, and then there's my aunt. All of us are sitting there eating a good meal happy. All the adults order one glass of wine with supper, no big deal. We have dessert. Me, my mother, and my father leave the diner and leave the restaurant and we go to the car. As soon as we get in the car, my mother starts up with the fantasy talk about Aunt Alice's daughter, saying that she was using a fake ID at dinner. This was wrong of her. How dare her use a fake ID? I know how old she is. No, that has to be fake. But here's the thing. I saw the ID. I told my mother, I think you're overreacting again, Mom, because I'm pretty sure they would never do that. On top of that, those IDs are hard to fake. On top of that, they scan the ID in. On top of that, I saw